Greetings and welcome. My name is Jake Rayson. I am a forest gardener and a forest garden designer. So, forest garden definition. This is a new slide. Why forest gardening? Well, where does it sit in the grand scheme of things? Really, for me, it comes down to doing something, getting involved, and doing something about the climate and ecological emergency that everybody is facing, and hardly anyone, in the grand scheme of things, hardly anyone is talking about. So it's my response to this. I think we really need to kind of rethink. This kind of cuts across the board. It cuts across everything. It's not just about forest gardening, but we really need to rethink how we do everything, and using life as the measure of whether something should be built, should be done, rather than using money as the measure, or or gross domestic product. So it's trying to change in the focus, and I think forest gardening is a really good place to start this as well, and it spills out into other areas too. And we are changing. There is massive change. This photograph is of the ice sheet in Greenland, which is decreasing rapidly. I think it's due to disappear by the end of the 2020s or by 2030. I think it's just crazy. There's an awful lot of information out there about climate emergency and ecological emergency. So we really need to adapt to that change. Now, we need to change as a species. We need to change, otherwise we will go extinct. And we also need to change on an individual basis as well, so that we are ready for the change. The coronavirus crisis has actually shown this, that we really, as individuals, get prepared for this. And a forest garden, again, is a way of preparing for this, is building up resilience and building up local resilience within the community as well. So this is why I think forest gardening is kind of part of this whole movement. It's just it's a small part, but for me it's an important part, and it's what I enjoy doing, and this is how I want to contribute. There is a chap called Climate Ben on Twitter. For those of you who are on Twitter, he is kind of, what do you call it, progressive or left-leaning views, but he's actually publicising it. He is talking about the research and the articles that are giving all the warnings, and this is from scientists. This is not some an opinion down at the pub. This is proper science-based information. So he's worth a follow. It can be a bit depressing at times, but definitely just to find out what is actually going on, he is really good. So Climate Ben on Twitter. So definition of the forest garden. I like to describe it as a wildlife orchard which has which is self-sustaining. So you grow plants that supply nutrients for the whole of the garden, and it has windbreaks around to protect it. And it's been underplanted. Rather than being underplanted with grass, it is underplanted with edible shrubs and herbaceous perennial vegetables. And there is a permanent living ground cover as well. So you can actually picture this in your mind. This is what a forest garden looks like, and this is how it kind of behaves. It's a wildlife orchard with more things to eat and more places for wildlife to live in. There are kind of three characteristics of it. Firstly is that it's productive, which means that you grow crops there. So crops can be to eat, but they can also be building materials, bamboo, hazel, and herbs and dyes, a whole range of different produce. And it's productive in that the space that it uses all the available space. You're growing in layers, so you're using the kind of ground layer, the kind of shrub layer, the small tree layer, the canopy layer. You have climbers, you have root crops. So it's using all the space, and it's using it kind of efficiently in a productive way. It's also sustainable, and this for me is the key definition of what a forest garden is. It's something that can be sustained indefinitely. Indeed, it actually contributes to the kind of wider ecology. And it's really bizarre, because if you think about a forest garden, on the one hand it's a closed loop system, and by that I mean, you don't have any inputs. You don't bring in horse manure, and you don't bring in pesticides, and you're not bringing in water from the mains. It's kind of self-sustaining, and it's what is called in some circles a closed loop system. But it's also open to the wider landscape. It's actually more responsive to the wider landscape. So you're paying far more attention to what plants grow there naturally and grow locally, and to the wildlife as well, what wildlife you have where you are, and what you grow will depend upon your situation and will depend upon the flora and fauna in your locality. So it's a funny thing. It's a closed loop system, but in actual fact, it's way more open to where it is, and it's far more connected. And it's a carbon sink. You know, trees and healthy soil and shrubs, they all lock in carbon. So it's going to be carbon, you know, the actual garden itself will be carbon positive. Hold on, carbon neutral. No, do you know what I mean? It's taking in more carbon than it's putting out, rather than most gardens which kind of don't do that. So it's really good for that, and it's kind of sustainable. This is what the whole point of the ecological and climate emergency is about. It's creating habitat for wildlife, which is what this whole workshop will be about. You're actually doing something about it, and it might be really small, but it's important, and it's important for the wildlife that you have in your garden. So if you ever kind of beset by doubt about you're not making a difference, believe me, you are making a difference. It does make a difference, and you can see that difference with your own eyes, and you can hear that difference with your ears. It does make a difference, so please do persevere. And the third kind of characteristic is that it's low maintenance, and this really is a kind of, I don't know, I was going to say byproduct of it, but it's not up there, but it's kind of true that it's kind of messy. I like to think of a forest garden in terms of painting. A forest garden is like broad brush strokes, and it's kind of quite practical, and it's quite, it's quite crude in some respects. It's not dainty, detailed, ornamental planting. It's like, okay, we'll have ground cover there over that huge patch, which will be this, and then we'll let some native flowers come up there. So it's kind of broad, but it's part of the beauty of it is that that's the point, is that it's providing a habitat. It's not supposed to be neat and tidy. So for the example here, there's no, in the forest garden itself, you aren't fertilizing plants. I mean, you are fertilizing plants, but you're not creating compost and then putting compost down. You do chop and drop mulching, which means that you grow a comfrey by each fruit tree, and then a couple of times a year you chop it down and you lay it around the base of the fruit tree, and that mulch provides potassium for the fruit tree. So it's low maintenance. There's no mowing. You reduce the amount of grass that you have going on that you have to mow. So there's no mowing. Basically, it's kind of weeding, and even that is minimal once the forest garden is established. It's weeding, and it's kind of maintenance in terms of harvesting the produce, and then a bit of pruning. All right, so it's kind of not much at all really. It's quite incredible. Okay, and then I've got 5 guidelines, which I just going to say these are the things to bear in mind throughout the process of creating a forest garden. First of all, protection. Really important to protect your forest garden. You really want to be using windbreaks. In this example here, I've got a yellow dogwood. Really nice and flexible windbreak plant. Grows about 2-3 meters. Very easy to control. No thorns on it, so it's actually nice to have around in a kind of walkway situation. But they take time. They take a few years to kind of get properly established, and we're quite exposed here in West Wales. We're high up on a hill. So what I really would recommend do if you're in an exposed situation without much cover is to put in nurse trees around individual plants. And this is like a kind of tree that is kind of sacrificial tree. It's only there for a few years until the windbreaks get established, until the tree gets established. And this a common one to use is broom. Nitrogen fixing, member of the pea family. very good for pollinators. So use this as a kind of temporary little windbreak for each individual tree, and failing that, then build a dead hedge. I saw there's a chap called John Little, I think I mentioned this last week, Grass Roof Company, and he had beautiful dead hedge, which was kind of quite sculptural, quite incredible, and much prettier than mine. So you can actually use that. And Andy Goldsworthy, the artist, using natural materials. You can use natural materials and you can make it beautiful. It doesn't have to be some scrappy old rubbish like what I've got here. So yeah, dead hedge is fantastic. Protect your plants, protect your forest garden. Next thing is spacing. So spacing is critical. Know the final size of the trees and the shrubs that you're growing. Trees are more important to know the final size because they're harder to move. They take more work to move once they start to get established. The rule of thumb is 1/4 to 1/2 of the combined average canopy diameter. So you've got 2 4-meter diameter trees, and the spacing between them should be between 1 and 2 meters. And this allows enough light to come through from the canopy layer down to the bottom, so you can grow crops beneath. You don't want it kind of shaded out. Okay. Layers is very important as well. I mentioned it before. Use all the available space. Yep. So plant your ground cover, herbaceous perennials, shrubs, larger shrubs, canopy layer, root crops, climbers. So use layers. Grow in layers. Grow in 3 dimensions. Excuse me. And ground cover. Very easy win. Choose a ground cover that's suitable for your situation. Here in West Wales, there is, what's it called? Oh, goodness me. Ground ivy, Glaucoma heteracea. It grows really well on damp, high nutrient soil, which is kind of our conditions in a lot of parts of the garden. So this is what I'm using in a lot of places because it grows naturally so well. It's a good ground cover. You don't need to chop it every couple of weeks like you do with grass. You don't have to keep mowing it. That's the whole point of living ground cover, and it locks in the nutrients into the soil and provides habitat for wildlife, and can provide nutrients for the soil as well. So living ground cover, cover up that soil, keep it covered. And then nutrients, you are supplying nutrients by using plants. You're using nitrogen fixing plants, such as alders and members of the pea family, and autumn olive shrubs, Elaeagnus, and then you are growing plants that provide potassium. That's the other main one, and the key kind of plant for that is comfrey. So grow the sterile Bocking 14, so it doesn't spread so much, but it's fine. It's a big bushy plant. So those, and then finally you use human wee, and use that around the garden as well. Don't waste that. If you could work out a way of doing it, yes, it's actually very handy. It does provide a lot of nutrients for the plants as well. So you're providing the nutrients all in. Okay, that's the end of that one. And now we'll jump straight into, oopsie, the wildlife gardening, the wildlife forest garden. So, first of all, big thank you to Sarah Wilson. If you haven't seen her, she runs a podcast called Roots and All. So if you haven't seen Roots and All podcast, have I got it here? Oh yes. Oh, that's her there. If you haven't seen Roots and All podcast, rootsandall.co.uk, go and subscribe to it. It's fantastic. Covers a lot of kind of not specifically forest gardening, but covers an awful lot of wildlife gardening, and kind of ethical concerns. It's actually, she's really, really good. Total respect to her. And today's workshop, we're going to be looking at growing, the whole reason why forest gardens are so good for wildlife gardening. There is a natural fit in my mind. There's a natural fit between forest gardening and wildlife gardening. They really are interconnected. So every forest garden, by design, by its very nature, is a wildlife garden. Native plants rock. Native plants are brilliant. I'll give a quick discussion about that. And easy wildlife features. There's so much information out there. I do feel like forest gardening is it's part ornamental, it's part wildlife, it's part productive vegetable gardening. It's part orchard. There's just so much in there, and there is just so much information and so much good, so many good practitioners in all these different fields. So this is just really skimming the surface, just to give you an idea about the kind of how forest gardening fits in with wildlife gardening. And easy wildlife features will just be easy wildlife features will be those features which most people can put into their garden. So really kind of nice and simple, nice and straightforward. So first off, nature. Let nature do the work. This is a photograph of an Italian alder planted in in our first forest garden. It's 4 years old now. It's 7 meters high. It's giant. It's amazing. It's providing nitrogen for the whole of the forest garden. It's an absolutely beautiful tree. I mean, it's amazing. I'm kind of bowled over really. And if anyone's ever had to chop a tree down for whatever reason, then they will understand how much biomass is there, and you have so little work to kind of create that biomass and to lock the carbon in and to harvest the fruits from it, the produce from it, or the benefits from it. So let nature do the work. There's a forest gardener called Graham Bell. I think he's vegan as well. I'm pretty sure he is, a permaculturalist. And this is a quote from him: "Let nature do the work." And it really does tie in with oh my goodness me, slide pics are slightly out of focus. Oh, sorry, I've not been looking at the comments. Sorry. Let's have a quick look. Okay, yep, sorry. Interlude there. So I just had a message through saying the slideshow pictures were a bit blurry. Sorry about that. I can't seem to do anything about it, so I'll soldier on. So let nature do the work. I need to get a picture of myself so I can show you this book. Buy this book. Everyone probably has already. Martin Crawford, Creating a Forest Garden. The subtitle is Growing Edible Crops and Working with Nature to Grow Edible Crops. And that really does sum it up. It really is. This is what it's about. You're using natural processes to get produce. Yep, that's the whole aim. That's the whole idea. It is sustainable. We can keep on doing it like this. It's a better way of growing gardens. It's a better way of growing food. Yep. So working with nature. Let nature do the work. And there's a really good, did I put it here? Oh yes, here we go. So this is an illustration from Martin's book, which he kind of gave me permission to use a while back. And it just shows. I don't know if I can get this right. It's going to be the right way around. So it's going to be, is it from this side to that side or to the right? Yeah. So is that wild nature? Wild nature on one side to the left, and then arable cultivation on the far side on the right. And the further right you go, the more fragility, the more the carbon emissions are higher. There's more uniformity. There's more energy used. It's higher maintenance. And the further left you go, there's less maintenance, there's less greenhouse gases, there's less energy being used. So you've got nature on one side, and then it's arable cultivation on the other. And a forest garden really is kind of balanced on the edge. I wrote a little kind of haiku thing, but gently balance the garden on the cusp of woodland. And it's just on that point, yep, so it's kind of minimal maintenance. So you're kind of working with the natural processes. Here in the UK, we really have, in most places, it's not everywhere, there's a tendency for left to its own devices, you will get trees. Generally, that's the kind of thing that will happen. So, yeah, your forest garden, you're using that natural process. So whatever the land wants to be, and I think this is kind of a really interesting point as well. People have this idea that forest gardens are intensely wooded areas, and it's they're like a forest, but they're not. They're like the forest. They're like the woodland edge, and also it's more about the process than it is about the actual species. So if you're in a kind of coastal area and there's a lot of gravel, and the plants you'll grow will be really different. So long as you're following the kind of principles of a forest garden, which I went through earlier, that's a forest garden. It can be a forest garden in any scale. I've got a forest garden in a pot out the back. Or you can have a forest garden in 20 acres. It's the principles of it. So we want more nature. We want to kind of get the gardening closer to nature. And in practice, what this means is it's perennials. It's perennial, productive perennials. So trees, shrubs, perennial vegetables. Windbreaks to protect plants, but also providing habitat and food for wildlife. Living ground cover. You're not using a bark mulch, not permanently anyway. Providing nutrients, so you're providing nutrients within the garden. You're not importing anything. Chop and drop mulching, as I mentioned before. Creating a wildlife habitat so that you're encouraging the predators. You're using natural processes to get the whole garden in a balanced state, so it's a balanced ecosystem. And another interesting side of this as well is that it's this kind of question of balance, and a forest garden is never finished. I mean, you really are, it's an ongoing process, and at the different stages of a forest garden, you're going to get different types of balance. At the early stages, there will be more light. You'll have more annuals. There will be, you'll have more kind of sun-loving perennial vegetables. But as the shade increases, as the windbreaks get thicker, things start to change, and you've got to be kind of aware of that and change with them. And finally, native plants and flowers. So encourage nature where you can, because it benefits everybody. This is the point. Oh dear, let's have a look. So I've got some more things. Monaco, yeah, readable. Cool. Okay. Next one, native plants rock. So there's an awful lot of What I would say is, use native plants where you can in a forest garden. There's enough space in most gardens. If you've got a smaller forest garden, then there might not be so much space for native plants, but really in a larger space there's no excuse not to, really. So for example, you can grow hawthorns in a windbreak hedge on a northern border, or Guelder rose, Viburnum opulus, both natives in the UK. So use native plants where you can. And the reason for this is that native plants have co-evolved. I've got to get rid of my... Native plants have co-evolved with the wildlife, so that they're providing, not only are they providing like the pollinators, like in the example here with this May blossom, with the hawthorn blossom, but they're also providing food for the larval stage of insects, for caterpillars. So people talk about an example. People talk about, oh, I've got a buddleia bush, that'll be fine. That's providing for wildlife. It kind of is, but it's not providing any of the services, any of the functions as a host plant. It's providing it for long-tongued butterflies, and for example, but it's not providing for the larval stage of insects. So host plants for insects. This is why it's so important to use a native species. And also try not to use cultivars. This isn't like a hard and fast rule saying you can't have non-natives in a forest garden, but it's just to say, bear it in mind when you're designing a garden. If you've got the choice and you have the option, then go for native plants. The no caterpillars equals no birds, and this really is true. You've got to provide, again, you're looking at providing an ecosystem for all of nature in a forest garden. And if you don't have the food source for the birds, then you won't have birds. Yeah, it's you need to provide for everybody, and that comes from, we've got to move away from this idea of insects as pests. If we see insects as part of the whole web of life and part of the web of life, rather than something that has to be removed so that we can have our produce. And then if you have predators, then you won't have an issue with insects. So if you've got something that predates on the insects, on the pests, then you won't have a problem with the pests, and you don't have to get rid of them. It's about keeping everything in balance. And that quote, "No caterpillars equals no birds," is from Karen Bussolini, who's a wildlife gardener and a coach. And 2/3 for the birds is a kind of rule of thumb for a garden. There's a chap called Doug Tallamy, who's a naturalist and an activist, and he has written a couple of really good books. I haven't got around to reading them yet, but it's a good rule of thumb for growing 2/3 natives in your garden, whatever your garden is. 2/3 for the birds, and just kind of keep that in mind when you're considering what to plant. Do think about using native plants where you possibly can. So in a forest garden as well, I think there is an awful lot of there's some really good native plants and kind of cultivars of native plants. So for example, hazels. I'm kind of quite into hazel trees at the moment as a crop because they're native and they provide an awful lot for wildlife. And the same with hawthorn as well. And you can actually graft. Hawthorn is a Crataegus monogino is one of the native hawthorns. But you can graft non-native hawthorns, North American hawthorns, onto a UK native hawthorn rootstock. So you can have the best of both worlds. You can have a native part of the tree and a non-native part of the tree as well. And to provide some information for you, there's a fantastic website called the Database of Insects and Their Food Plants. And this is incredible. It just lists the known interactions between insects and plants. So you find out what the name of the family of the plant is that you want, and then the genus, and then the species. I use Wikipedia to find out the name of the family for a specific plant because I don't know what they are off the top of my head for most of them. And then you can look up that specific plant. So in the screenshot here, which is horizontal, it's 270 plus insects use that common oak, the UK common oak, Quercus robur, I think it is. Sorry about the pronunciation. They use 270 insect species use the oak as a food plant, which is absolutely incredible. It's just mind-boggling. So I think I might have the screen. Oopsie, let's have a quick look. There we go. So you can see here. That's just bonkers. Just look at how much wildlife that is, and we all know what eats them: birds. So really, really good, and it kind of covers so many plants as well. So totally recommend it. Database of insects and their food plants. Just a little word of warning as well. It's using. It's a bit older. It's some of the scientific names aren't quite up to date, but it's still totally usable. And another really good resource is the RHS Plant Finder, online plant finder, and there's a link. There's a link here. It lists over 300,000 plants, and there's about 300 native plants listed, which is the link down here. So if you're looking for something specific, you can click on like I searched for Crataegus for hawthorn, and then you can see that at the bottom on the left hand side there's a little checkbox, and it will filter it as to whether they're native or not. So it's actually, I found it really, really handy, and it's good for when you're designing a garden or creating a garden where it's a mix of ornamental and kind of forest garden too. So that's a really, really good resource. I use it all the time for my work. And wildflowers, I think is kind of, there's so much information out there, and my kind of knowledge is so limited, but that shouldn't stop you from kind of creating habitat and finding out more. I've got a link on my website for wildflowers, wildflower article, and there's a whole load of information that if you want to find out more about native wildflowers, there's a list of stuff here. Botanical Society of Britain and Ireland, BSBI, is the place to get started. There's a load of stuff on Twitter, and there's a load of stuff on Facebook as well. Some really, really cool people doing some super interesting work. And what I'd actually like to see is to have this, to incorporate native plants within a forest garden, within ornamental gardens as well. So I better zoom. I can talk. You can talk about this for days and days, but I better move on. Easy wildlife features. Now, these are things that pretty much, it depends on what your setup is and depends upon the size of your garden, but you can incorporate a lot of these features in a very small garden. First and foremost, one of the most important things for attracting wildlife is water. Am I going to show stuff here? Oh, I can't remember what order I've got stuff in. So water, it can be in a very small space. So you can have quite literally I'm going to get this book. You can have a very small space and a pond in a very small space. So I've got a book here called the Wildlife Pond Book. I can't see if I can see that. Wildlife Pond Book. By Jules Howard, who's on Twitter, and he's got a fantastic podcast as well, which goes through. He's got a really, really small pond, and he talks about. Can't see it. He talks about setting up this tiny, tiny, tiny pond. Of course, I can't find it. He talks about setting up a really, really small pond and the kind of process and what animals appear and what they're doing, and more about the animals. So it's absolutely fascinating, and you can use like tiny little tiny ponds, and they still will attract a vast amount of wildlife. So please, get a pond. Do get a pond. Number one, get a pond. And start out with a small pond, see how you go with it. Get a bigger pond. And then meadow. Now I say meadow. I use the term meadow kind of loosely. This is our meadow up in the forest garden. It's a patch of grass that it only gets scythed maybe once a year, maybe once or twice a year. And I'll pull out the docks and I'll pull out the nettles so they don't take over. But I'll just let it do its thing, and it's just a patch of ground, and I'll mow a path through it, and it really is. It's just incredible. It's just an amazing space, and you can have a very small patch of ground, which will encourage a lot of wildlife. One point about this is if you do have a patch of grass, then do kind of connect it to the side of the garden, so it's not just standing by itself. That you want to have like corridors in the garden itself, so that wildlife can move around without being exposed. So another part is hedges. So I'm always talking about growing windbreak hedges and dead hedges, and hedges provide food source and habitat for wildlife, as well as providing fruit for humans, or windbreak for humans, or nitrogen fixing. They're providing habitat and food for wildlife as well. So they're fantastic. Have a hedge, have a kind of loose hedge, and something that you're not really cutting. Grow something that will get to the size that you want, so you're not permanently having to trim it and cut it. So and then kind of leave it in a kind of hedge-like state without it being neatly trimmed all the time. Then that really will encourage the wildlife. And a log pile. Log piles are great because what you do, you get some logs and then you put them in a pile, and that's it. It's fantastic. It's so simple. Really, really recommend it. I was moving a log pile up in the forest garden the other day, and this little chap was pootling around, not very happy that I disturbed him. But log piles are great. Really, really, really like log piles. And the same thing, and they can be out of the way. They can be behind some plants. Like you can have an ornamental garden, and then you can have a little pile of logs just by the fence, doing their log thing with their wildlife thing, and you don't even know they're there. But it's just so easy, such an easy win. And the same way, stone pile. I actually don't have a. We've got lots of slate walls here, which are kind of gradually recovering, and they provide habitat as well for wildlife. They're fantastic, and for different types of wildlife. So you're providing what is so nice in a garden is that you can provide a diversity of habitat and food sources that you really would take a while to get established in nature. So yeah, have fun with it. So I've got a couple of resources as well. So podcasts, absolutely brilliant. 10, yeah. So my favourite podcast is the Roots and All podcast. I was a guest on one, so I still haven't listened to it because I can't stand the sound of my own voice. But I did an interview with Sarah Wilson, and really, really good. Huge range of topics. Fantastic, really fantastic podcast. So you can listen to all the old episodes as well. Growing Greener, it's an American one. Fantastic, really, really good. Really, totally recommend that as well. It's about wildlife gardening essentially. It's fabulous. And A Way to Garden, which is kind of more general gardening. Margaret Roach has been doing it for years. Total respect to her. She's just kind of, yeah, she has so much information about. She's really into birds and she's really into frogs, and she will talk about ornamental aspects of it as well. But it's really, really joined up. So my 3 top kind of wildlife gardening podcasts. And in terms of books, oh yes. Benjamin Vogt as a book, A New Garden Ethic. Oh, there's 2 pictures of it. You can see there. I've got one here, and there's one on the screen. Brilliant, really, really good. It's unapologetic. It talks about human supremacy over the natural world, and some people might find that difficult, but it's such a totally important discussion to be having, because the sooner we can get away from the idea of hierarchy and life forms being at the top of the pyramid and move to an idea of a web of life, the sooner we can do that, the better for everyone. Yeah, because we are all living creatures. So really, really recommend that. That's fantastic. Wildlife Gardening for Everyone and Everything is a great introduction to wildlife gardening. By Kate Bradbury of I'm sure she's done lots of things, Springwatch, but a great wildlife gardener, real inspiration. So that's a really, really good introduction. There's lots of good stuff in there, and I'm really aware that I haven't covered plants at all. I really haven't covered plants. Sorry, I haven't covered animals. I haven't really kind of looked at the different types of animal and what plants they like, and but I haven't got the time. I'm sorry. And then the Wildlife Pond, which I showed you earlier, Jules Howard. And The Wild Garden. Now, there's quite a lot of books out there, like Benjamin Vogt's book, about wildlife gardening, or ornamental wildlife gardening, really. But a lot of them have a North American focus. And I found it really hard to get information about ornamental gardening with UK native plants. There's not much out there. And the best that I could come up with is a book called The Wild Garden by Violet Stevenson. Costs £3.50. I think I bought it from Amazon. It's the only place I could get it, second hand. Written in when was it written? I think it was written in 1985. Written in 1985, so that's like 35 years ago. That's all I can find. It's crazy. I did mean to put in. Yeah, so if anybody knows any kind of gardening with UK native plants, do let me know. Please do. Yeah, do tell me. I'd love to find out more. And I'm saying this from a forest garden perspective. I think the ornamental aspect is so easy kind of to be forgotten and to concentrate on it purely as a productive space. But I think if you want to include people into it, you do need to think about the ornamental aspect. And I think if you then start gardening with UK native plants, that ties everything together. So you're gardening ornamentally, like for visual appeal, aesthetic appeal, but you're also designing for the wildlife as well. You're designing in pollinator friendly flowers, and you're designing in food sources for caterpillars. So I do think it's important. I do think it's a real part. It's not one or the other. You can have your cake and eat it. Oh, another really good book I found was I've been reading Flora Botanica, Richard Mabey. Fascinating, really fascinating. I was a bit bowled over actually by it. I pretty much read it cover to cover. Really good. Really, it talks about folklore behind UK plants and different plants, and including non-natives, some non-natives as well. So yeah, there we go. Those are the books what I recommend. So now, forest garden takeaways. Yeah, native plants where possible, because they've co-evolved with the wildlife. Simple things: ponds, shrubs, and log piles. Okay, those are the three wildlife features you can get into your garden. And garden for everyone. Think about who you're gardening for, not just yourself, future generations, other life forms. Garden for everyone. So there we go. Hope that was. Is that? That's the end. That's the end of that. Welcome to the forest garden. Absolutely amazing day. I'll turn it around. You don't want to look at my face. It's absolutely stunning. Ash still hasn't come out the ash tree, but the broom is in full blossom. Okay, where was I doing? Oh, I remember now. That's the problem, you can get lost really easily. This is a Rosa rugosa hedge down here with a yellow cornice, just so it's not so prickly at the end. That's the annual vegetable patch, which is becoming more and more perennial. So I just wanted to show you a couple of features. Firstly is the wild flowers. Oh, it's great. There's creeping buttercup, which is everywhere, constantly pulling it out, and then speedwell, which I'm leaving. It's more really for the annual vegetables. That when you grow annual vegetables, you need to keep on. You need to keep weeding to stop so the slugs don't have a habitat and don't then eat the crops. Whereas if you have perennial vegetables, you get around that problem. This is a wildlife pond. It's a bit of a state. It's really simple. I say really simple. It's kind of straightforward to build. I mean, do get a book, get some information about how to do it. But the cost of this was, I was quite surprised. It was about £50 to hire the chap to do it with a digger. Make sure you get it level. You could do it by hand. I mean, this is a relatively big pond, and then I think the liner was £100 odd or something. So it's quite a few days work, and it's quite a lot. It's a bit of an expense to do it, but totally achievable. And we haven't really done much with it, to be honest. I put a couple of plants in. There's a lily. Can't remember which one it is. Firecrest, I think. And a couple of native plants, and so I haven't done an awful lot with it, but I think that's fine. Just kind of get it established, and then you can always tidy up and get some more native plants in there as well. And we have dragonflies and frogs and lots of water snails and water boatmen, and yeah, it's all going on. So I put it here so that it kind of provides a home for frogs and a source for wildlife to come and do their wildlife thing by the ponds, but then also to predate on the slugs on the annual beds as well. And then we've got a couple of native flowers apart from the nettles which are there. There's also a red campion and what's it called? Columbine, Aquilida vulgaris, with edible leaves earlier on in the season and edible flowers. I do believe they're edible flowers. I have to double check that. So, yeah, and then there's a hawksbit, I think. I don't know, not very good on wildflowers, and some plantain, yeah, just kind of let things do their thing, and then do selective weeding, selective kind of pulling things up. So I'll move the grass out of here, and I'll put some more kind of ground cover. Oh, and there's lemon balm in there as well. So that's the flowers, that's the wildlife pond in terms of features. And then up here we've got the windbreak, and this is about 4 years old. This is yellow dogwood, Cornus flavaremia stolonifera, for those who like their scientific names. I never knew that it had such beautiful flowers when I planted it. So it's yeah, it's not a native, it's kind of naturalised, I think. I could be wrong. And this is, yeah, it's 4 years old, and you can see it's starting to thicken up, and it goes to about 3 meters high, so about another meter to go. Oh, yeah, about another meter to go. Look, you can see that, and about 2 meters wide. So leave the space when you do put a hedge in. Leave the space. Make sure you've got enough space on either side for it. And what's nice about dogwood is that it's kind of easy to manage. It's easy to, it doesn't mind being cut back. It responds really well for that. So if you do need to cut it, or it's kind of easy to do, as opposed to something like a Rosa rugosa, which is a bit kind of pricklier, or a sea buckthorn. Right, and then I just wanted to show you very quickly. That's a Turkish rocket, which is going into the perennial vegetable bed area. And then we've got elephant garlic and some garlic, borlotti beans. Where is it? I've lost it. I think it's down here. So this needs a bit of attention. This is a kind of got a lot of plantain in here, and this is the log pile. There it is. It's just a pile of logs. It's fantastic, so totally recommend it. So easy to do. And then I've got another hedge here. I'm growing aronia, melanocarpa, aronia berries, and this is, I think it's Viking, or it might be Nero, can't remember. A fruiting. This is this will be a windbreak hedge. It'll take a couple of years to get established. So there we go. That's all I'm going to show you. I'm going to zoom back now. Oh, there's Ronnie Barker, the forest garden dog. I'm going to zoom back now. So just wanted to show you that. Really, kind of simple features to do. Simple things that you can do in your own garden.